Good morning and welcome to Sharper Iron. Spend the next hour with us studying the living and active Word of God, His two-edged sword of law and gospel, recorded for you in Holy Scripture, all about Jesus Christ, crucified, risen, and ascended for you. Thanks for tuning in this morning here on Worldwide KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere. I'm your host, Pastor Timothy Appel of Grace Lutheran Church in Smithville, Texas. Sharper Iron is underwritten by the Lutheran Church Extension Fund, where your investments help support the work of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Visit lcef.org for more information. On this Monday, April 6th, we're studying Matthew chapter 27, verses 1 through 10. Jesus has been convicted of blasphemy by the Sanhedrin, but it is the Romans who must execute the death penalty. Before Matthew recounts Jesus' trial before Pilate, however, he writes what happened to Judas when he went back to the chief priests and the elders. To help us sharpen our faith in Christ as we study God's Word today, we have with us Pastor Hans Fiene. Pastor Fiene serves at River of Life Lutheran Church in Channahon, Illinois. Pastor Fiene, welcome to Sharper Iron.
Good to be with you guys.
As we get started this morning, Pastor Fiene, give us some context in Matthew's Gospel, broad context, narrow context. What do we need to know going into today's text?
Yes, so obviously this is getting into kind of the second part of Christ's Passion. So you first have the lead up where you have the institution of the Lord's Supper. You have them going out to the Garden of Gethsemane. You have Jesus being betrayed and arrested. You have his trial. Then you have Peter's denial of Jesus. And then chapter 27 begins with being delivered over to Pilate. So as you noted, the chief priests and the scribes know that they have to essentially have the secular authorities do their dirty work in putting Jesus to death. And so they bring him over to Pilate with all of these trumped up charges.
Let's go ahead and read the text and start digging in then. This is Matthew chapter 27, beginning at verse 1. When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate the governor. Then when Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he changed his mind and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. They said, What is that to us? See to it yourself. And throwing down the pieces of silver into the temple, he departed, and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the pieces of silver, said, It is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since it is blood money. So they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. Therefore that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken by the prophet Jeremiah, saying, And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him on whom a price had been set by some of the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me. There's the text for today, Matthew chapter 27, verses 1 through 10. Pastor Fiene, the text starts with that. It closes out the scene of the trial of Jesus from the Sanhedrin before moving on to Pilate, which is tomorrow's text. But in those first couple verses there, the first thing at least stands out to me, when morning came. Now this is Good Friday that's being described here in Matthew chapter 27, and here's morning of Good Friday. It just there's a bit of irony, I think, there when we come to chapter 28 later, and it's going to be the dawn of the first day of the week. The difference between these two mornings. Take us into those first couple of verses of the text.
Yeah, so when morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. I think it's a great observation about morning. And what it also shows is, last night I was looking for something to watch on Amazon. So I took a nap after church, which meant I wasn't going to fall asleep until 3 o'clock in the morning. So I was looking for something pointless to watch, and I came across this old documentary about the recording of the We Are the World session. And you have all of these artists coming together, and they're showing how they're getting there at like 9 o'clock at night after the American Music Awards, and they're working all throughout the night and into the morning, for this great cause. And it's hosted or narrated or whatever by Jane Fonda, and she's highlighting this great level of devotion and tenacity that they all have for this great and wonderful cause. But if you think that people will work hard for a good cause, they work especially hard for a bad cause, and that's something that we see going here. So there's been this conspiring and this working throughout the night, And then in the morning, at the first opportunity that they can, they bring him over to Pilate, the governor. So sort of as the first item of business for the day, they want to make sure that they're handing him over to Pilate, and that Pilate is, as I said, going to do their dirty work of condemning Jesus to death.
The trial that they held in chapter 26 happened at night in darkness. Now it is morning. Is there, I've heard in the past, and I think I've probably taught this too, that the fact that the trial they held is at night makes it illegitimate, and now they're trying to make it legitimate in the morning. Is that part of what's going on here?
Yeah, I've never heard that before, but it certainly is it's an interesting observation, and wouldn't surprise me if that's the case. Things that are done by secret, away from the crowds and in the darkness of night, are generally not things that we are proud of doing. And you see this obviously with the chief priests and the scribes, the Pharisees, throughout the Gospels, that there's this constant fear of the people. And they're afraid to just simply come to Jesus in broad daylight and bring accusations against him, because they know the crowds are not going to receive that well. And you see Jesus talking about this when he's betrayed in Gethsemane, and when they come to arrest him in Gethsemane, where he basically says, "Look, I've been teaching all the time in the temple, and you guys didn't have anything to say then, but suddenly you're coming to me in the middle, you're coming to me at night away from the crowds with clubs and swords, as though I'm some sort of violent criminal." So there is a kind of, through their actions, there's a tacit acknowledgement that what they're doing is evil, and certainly from the perspective of an unbeliever, that what they're doing is shady, that they don't actually, this isn't the way that you conduct business when you're really confident about the uprightness of your cause. That's things like that don't happen in secret when you're really confident that you're the guy who's in the right. And I think by then coming to Pilate in the morning, then as soon as they can hand this over to Pilate and have him make that declaration, it's as though they're able to kind of wash their hands of the situation, and to give it this kind of air of legitimacy. This is something that people are constantly trying to do with their sins, is to give things the air of legitimacy. That if you can say that someone who has some sort of authority is actually the one who made this decision, then you don't need to wrestle with the illegitimate way that you went about doing things.
That question of authority has been a key one in Holy Week, back in Matthew chapter 21 or 22, 21, I think, where they come to Jesus and ask him what authority he has to do these things, and he turns the question on them. And so here it comes up again. What about Pilate? I think in Matthew's gospel, this is the first time we meet him as an individual within the gospel. What do we know about Pilate, and why is he important at this stage in the narrative?
So Pilate is the Roman appointee, the governor of the region, and I don't remember exactly off the top of my head what the parameters of the region are, but so Israel is not a sovereign nation at this point in history. They are allowed to sort of exist broadly as the Jewish people so will under this arrangement, but they are ultimately controlled by the Roman government, and Pilate is the Roman appointee. So you see this a lot throughout ancient history with these empires that would rise and fall. What they kind of figured out over the process, I suppose, of trial and error with these empires was that if you're going to run an empire, you can't spend all of your time putting down uprisings, and so you have to give people some freedom to actually live according to the customs and the cultures and the religious practices of that people and of that culture. So what they would do is they would have things like, for example, you have the various series of Herods who are called the king of the Jews, even though they're really not legitimate kings of the Jews. They're not legitimate heirs to David's throne. But in particular, Herod the Great is an Edomite. He's sort of kind of halfway, a halfway Jewish convert. that the Romans sort of figure, well, he's Jewish enough to kind of pacify the people so they won't riot like we're putting, some Greek guy on the throne. But at the same time, he doesn't have any real loyalty to the Jewish people, and we know that he'll rule in a way that is beneficial to us. And you see kind of the same thing with Pilate, where so Pilate is not Jewish. Pilate is not meant to kind of pacify them in that sense. But Pilate knows there's kind of this tension between these two forces before him. So on the one hand, you've got the Roman government, which is the one employing him. It's the one that's put him into this position of power. It's the one that has authority to punish him if he carries that out unfaithfully in their eyes. And then you also have the Jewish people. So on the one hand, Pilate needs to keep them satisfied, but he also needs to keep the Roman government satisfied. And you can see that tension throughout the Passion narrative in all of the Gospels, where Pilate he knows that Jesus is innocent. He's probably very intelligent and savvy guy and he perceives that it's out of envy that the chief priests are bringing Jesus to him. So he knows this is a sham. But at the same time, he doesn't have a loyalty to the scriptures. He's not a believer. He doesn't recognize that Jesus is the actual Son of the living God. And on account of that, he doesn't have this sort of faithful desire to preserve the life of Jesus from these false accusations. As the accusations are ramping up and as the hostility is growing, and as we'll see later on, when he perceives that a riot is about to break out, he essentially just says, all right, fine, I'm going to give you guys what you want because I know that it's going to get me in trouble with my bosses in the Roman government if I if I make my decisions on the side of justice and let Jesus go and set him free. I know you guys are going to riot, and then the Romans are going to get angry at me, and they're going to yell at me, and possibly put me to death for not putting some random Jewish guy to death when it would have solved all of my problems.
Right. So, and Pilate's involvement here, he's got to be the one to do the actual execution. That's not an authority that the Jewish leaders themselves have at this point in history, right?
Right. Yeah. So they, the kind of the authority over civil matters has been given to the Roman government. So the Jews still have freedom to kind of police their own religious laws and things of that nature, but kind of this distinction we see, in the Old Testament between the ceremonial law and the civil law. So, these are the things you can eat. These are the types of fabric you can wear. These regulations versus for clean and unclean, who can work in the temple, kind of things of that nature. Those things are still left in place. But when it comes to actually putting people to death for kind of typical capital crimes, in particular, the way that they justify putting Jesus to death for claiming to be a king. That's the kind of stuff that is now at this point in history given to the Roman government.
And the other, particularly when it comes to the Roman government, Jesus has, in his predictions of his suffering and death, he said that he's going to be crucified. And that particularly is the execution tool of the Romans. So to get the Romans involved at this point is not only a practical matter of history, but it also has to do with what Jesus has said in terms of what his death will look like. He's going to be crucified. He's talked to his disciples about carrying their cross. And so the involvement of the Romans then, in that sense, is a part of fulfilling what Jesus has said as well, right?
Yeah, and as well as the prophecies of the scriptures in general. So, the whole cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. And so this is really a fascinating thing about studying the scriptures, is seeing how it is that the wheels of these fulfillments of prophecies are set in motion, over the course of hundreds of years, just over the course of centuries. So, so from what I understand, it's the Romans picked up crucifixion from the Persians, which was obviously a previous empire. So there's this long kind of sludging through the sorrow and misery of history, and yet God is using all of that, and he's showing us how his hand is at work through all of this in order to fulfill the scriptures. So So yes, in many ways, the Roman government was evil. Yes, what Pilate did was certainly sinful in handing Jesus over to death when Jesus had committed no crime and when Jesus was and is, in fact, the Son of God. But of course, God was using all of this and using the might and the power of the Roman army Roman Empire that he had allowed to build up in order to fulfill the scriptures and ultimately in order to bring about the salvation of the world. And of course, that's, and then after the crucifixion, that's kind of what we see going through. So that the continuing of the Roman Empire, for all of the evil that it accomplished, it's also kind of the outward shell of that empire, the strength of that empire is what it is that God ultimately will use in great part to spread the gospel throughout the world.
Now, at this point in the narrative, Pilate is just being introduced. It's really the chief priests and the elders who are the primary actors in this part of the text still and going forward as well. Again, in these first two verses, I see a little bit of irony here. Verse 2, they bound Jesus, the one who's come to set people free from their sins. They're the ones here, and I think this is important to notice. They deliver Jesus over to Pilate the governor. In the Greek, you've got the same verb. That's what Judas has done to Jesus. And later it's what Pilate is going to do to Jesus when it comes time for the crucifixion. They're delivering Jesus over constantly, which I think invites a bit of reflection as to, well, who's responsible for the death of Jesus? What's really going on here? I mean, there's a number of ways to tackle that question, Pastor Fiene.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. I think people have a tendency. There's a saying I frequently say. It's not a terribly eloquent way of putting it, but that when people won't repent, they recruit. And you see this all the time in life, So if you have a woman who's having marital problems and she's talking to her friends who are divorced are the ones who will very often be the most likely to convince her to divorce her husband. The biggest advocates oftentimes for legalized abortion are women who have had abortions. People who have engaged in certain sins are very frequently the ones who are trying to recruit as many people as they possibly can into committing those sins. And I think this is born from something in humans where we are convinced, according to our sinful nature, that we can somehow diffuse the judgment of God throughout the crowd. And if we can kind of spread it out evenly, it's sort of like putting on a pair of snowshoes. If you can spread the weight out evenly, then you're not going to sink into the snow. If you can spread out that judgment of God, it won't be as difficult to endure. It's a bit like back when you were in school, and the teacher would be getting ready to pass out a test, and you'd have some kid who would say, hey, you know what? I bet if we all refuse to take the test, there's no way she would fail all of us. And you always know the kid who's saying that is not the kid who studied for the test. It's not the kid who's very confident that he's going to get an A. It's the kid who knows, oh boy, this is going to go really badly. So if I can recruit everyone into this act of defiance with me, the teacher will get mad, but I bet the judgment won't be as bad as it is if it's just on me squarely and directly. And there's certainly that aspect of things going on all throughout the Passion, where you have the chief priests and the elders of the people conspiring against Jesus, wanting to put him to death, but they want to rope they want to rope Pilate into this, because if they can involve the secular authorities, then they can spread out that judgment. And with the secular authorities saying that Jesus is condemned, they can sort of say to themselves, see, we aren't the only ones here. We're not the only actors in this matter. And then, of course, as we get from Luke's gospel, Pilate hands over Jesus to Herod before he ends up getting sent back. So there's this constant trying to involve as many people and recruit as many people into the condemnation of Jesus as possible, which I think is ultimately born from this desire to kind of spread out that judgment and to ease your conscience, that if you can get as many people involved in it as possible, then you don't need to worry that what you're doing is wrong.
And perhaps that's a similar move that we would make when we try to identify the blame today, like who is at fault? Whose fault was it that Jesus was crucified? So many of our hymns point to the fact that it was my sin, mine,
Yeah.
the sin, right? And so we would try the same thing, but ultimately, as this narrative, putting it forward, I'm looking forward, to tomorrow's text where all the people are going to cry out, "His blood be on us and on our children." Ultimately, when we think about who's responsible for Jesus' death, we have to include ourselves along in that answer as well.
Yeah, this is, to me, one of the strange things I've oftentimes heard throughout my life is people asking this question. This question's like, did the Jews kill Jesus? And that's oftentimes used as a vile defense of anti-Semitism. But the strange thing about that, you'll have these debates where people say, "Oh no, it wasn't really the Jews; it was Pontius Pilate," and that's obviously how we confess things in the Creed. That it's ultimately we're laying this at the feet of Pontius Pilate. But at the same time, that's a fine question to ask as a kind of historical question. But as a deeper theological question, the reality, that's not at all the right question to ask, because as you note, the reality is that Jesus is put to death for our sins. So this wasn't something that was done. The death of Jesus Christ was not something that was done contrary to the will of God, but it was by the will of the Father. It was according to the will of the Father that he was crushed for our iniquities. So all of this is done directly by God in order to ensure that our sins are forgiven, in order to honor all of his promises, in order to give us the gift of eternal life. So it's for our sins, and that should be our primary focus, that as we meditate upon the nail marks in the hands and feet of Jesus, as we meditate upon the blood pouring down from his hands and his feet, from his brow, and all of this, we recognize we are the ones who brought this here. Through our own sins, we are the ones who put the Son of God to death. And as terrifying of a thing as that is to meditate upon, but then you go to the words of Jesus when he's saying, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Well, now, of course, in a primary sense, he's talking about those gathered in front of him who have handed him over to be put to death. But ultimately, those words are directed at those who are responsible for the death of Jesus Christ, and that's us sinners. We are the ones who have put him to death, and on account of that, we are the ones who have benefited from his forgiveness. We are the ones who have been given the right to live forever, because the God that we put to death in violence responded not in violence to us, but responded with love and with mercy and forgiveness and salvation.
I think within that as well, you're hitting on another aspect of this irony, that not only did our sins put Jesus on the cross, but actually this is the will of God, so that who has delivered Jesus over? Well, finally, this is something that God is at work in. As you said earlier with the Romans, you see God's hands throughout history to fulfill the scriptures. Throughout all of this, even as these human actors do what they are going to do, this is still God's will. He's the one that is directing these events, and he's doing it all for our salvation. So ultimately, who's delivering? Well, this is the work of God, finally.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, and again, kind of going back to the Creed, where we talk about how he was, delivered under Pontius Pilate and put to death under Pontius Pilate. That's important as an historical reality, because we need to emphasize the fact that the crucifixion is actually an event that happened in human history. So the whole purpose it's not so much that the Creed is assigning blame to Pilate, as much as the Creed is saying this was an historical event that took place in human time. It actually happened. Here's the historical figure who was present for it, so that we know this isn't just some story emerging, out of the mist of cultural mythology, but that it's a real, verifiable historical event, so that we can know that this did actually happen and that we benefited from it.
You're listening to Sharper Iron here on Worldwide KFUO, looking at the first 10 verses of Matthew chapter 27 this morning. We're going to take a short break, but we will be right back. Please stick around.
In this season of life, when everything seems to be constantly changing, one thing remains the same: the promises of God given to us in the Word of Christ. I'm Sarah Gulseth, a digital media specialist for KFUO Radio, here at home in my spare room, to remind you all the ways you can hear the Word of Christ on KFUO Radio from wherever you call home. Our daily broadcast at KFUO.org includes talk programs, sacred music, daily chapel services, weekend worship services, and Bible studies. Our on-demand library includes many of our broadcast programs, in addition to podcasts from LCMS partners. You and your family can stream KFUO Radio at KFUO.org or on the TuneIn app. You can even ask your smart speaker to play KFUO Radio. You can also pull up your favorite podcast app and search for KFUO Radio to find all of our available podcasts. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest updates, as well as daily Bible verses and hymns. We are KFUO Radio, Christ for you, anytime, anywhere, at KFUO.org.
Each weekday on the Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah, we share and discuss stories of living boldly Lutheran,
including missionary updates, mercy work, events and topics applicable to your daily vocations, and maybe some fresh dark roast.
The Coffee Hour, weekdays at 9 a.m. on KFUO, underwritten by Concordia University, Wisconsin.
Welcome back to Sharper Iron. On this Monday, April 6th, we're looking at Matthew chapter 27, verses 1 through 10 with Pastor Hans Fiene of River of Life Lutheran Church in Channahon, Illinois. Pastor Fiene, prior to the break, we'd looked at the first two verses of the text where the chief priests and elders take counsel. They're going to put Jesus to death. They take him to Pilate, the governor. And then Matthew shifts gears for a few verses here and changes scenes. And at least in the ESV, it's titled, Judas Hangs Himself. Maybe the first thing to consider is the scene that we get. When does it take place? Are we to understand it happening right then on Good Friday? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a little bit tough to tell the timing of this because Matthew notes that when Judas saw that Jesus was condemned, this may be that something that's not quite 100% chronological in the events of what's going on here. I think, however, though, that what Matthew means by that is that so it's not so much that this is taking place upon the point where Pilate condemns Jesus to death, but that rather that Judas, when he sees the direction that things are going, so he knows that Jesus is going to be condemned. He knows this is the end goal of the thing. He knows that this is the result of his actions. And that is obviously the key point here in what's happening. Is this is not so much Matthew doesn't give us this so much to give us a definitive timeline of this event, but rather to show us what happens when Judas sort of wakes up and realizes what it is that he's done, and what happens when the chief priests fail to do their job of speaking the forgiveness of sins to a man who has sinned, and the disastrous effects of that when Judas doesn't hear that word of absolution, and in particular when he doesn't think he can go to Christ to find it, so where he ends up taking his own life.
Right. So there's two main, and I think it's easy to forget this, that within this text there's two, and I hate the word characters, but characters in the sense that it's real. Okay. So I hesitate sometimes to use words like story and character because it sometimes makes it seem as if it's fake, but okay. So characters, right? You've got Judas on the one hand, and he stands out to us, but the chief priests, the elders are also important. So we need to really consider both here. Let's start with Judas, because Judas is the one who's brought up first by Matthew there in verse 3. Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned. He changed his mind. I mean, what does that mean, that Judas changed his mind? What? And I know we don't want to psychologize too much, but what's going on with Judas here?
All right, so you just said you don't want to psychologize too much, but I'm going to psychologize a bit because you
can do it.
I think that we have oftentimes a somewhat inaccurate view of Judas. So if you kind of take a step back and look a little bit more at the fullness of what's going on, some details we get from John chapter 12, right? So in John chapter 12, beginning of the chapter is when Jesus is anointed by his feet are anointed by Mary. And so John writes, but Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Jesus said, leave her alone so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you always have with you, but you do not always have me. Now, I think this is a really interesting thing that happens here. So John tells us that Judas wasn't actually concerned about the poor, but that he used to help himself to what was in the money bag. And I think we sometimes have a tendency to view Judas as this guy who was sort of like a double agent for the devil for the entirety of his time following Jesus. And there's not really anything in the scriptures that would indicate that to us, that would indicate that kind of motivation. Rather, I think what happens here is that Judas has a secret compulsion. He has a secret sin, which is that he's been stealing from the money bag. And here in this moment, he sort of tips his hand. And when Jesus responds to him and basically says, leave her alone, because you're always going to have the poor with you, but you won't always have me. The context of this appears to me that I think what's happening here is Judas is taking this as Jesus acknowledging that he knows what's really going on with him. So that Jesus is ultimately saying to Judas, I know what you're up to here. And in this moment, Judas feels exposed and he feels angry and he feels he gets defensive. And in all of this, this happens 6 days before Jesus is arrested. So it's not even a full week. So it's not that Judas has been kind of conspiring from the beginning to put Jesus to death, but what happens is he realizes that Jesus knows his secret. He gets angry at being rebuked, and he's nervous that he might be exposed. And after a few days of kind of turning himself upside down in anger, he makes this rash and anger-filled decision to throw everything away. And so I think in many ways, this actually shows us that we are much more similar to Judas than we might like to admit. So the man who, it's easy to sympathize with Peter, where Peter has his moments of weakness, where his denial of Jesus is born out of fear and weakness. But we like to kind of present Judas as this guy who's always been the devil from the beginning, when in reality, he's most likely a guy who just had a really bad week. He's a guy who got completely turned upside down and filled with rage, and he wants to separate himself from Jesus, and he wants to get away from all this judgment. And so he goes to the chief priest because he knows they hate him, and he says, "Well, all right, what are you going to give me if I hand him over to you?" And so he conspires for this plan, and then after the plan comes to fruition, after Jesus is arrested, and once he sees very clearly, this was not some way to just ruin Jesus's week, but this is actually going to result in Christ's death. He feels this immense regret, and he changes his mind, which is the term associated with repentance. But it's not full repentance. It's not repentance that trusts in the mercy and the forgiveness of Jesus. So he kind of aims it in the wrong direction, and he goes to the chief priests, and he throws the money back. And this 30 pieces of silver, which is really interesting, because this is, according to the law of Moses, the amount that you pay for basically for involuntary manslaughter. And so in other words, it's as though this is kind of the other interesting thing about Judas is he doesn't want to fully admit that he knew what he was doing. So he tries to kind of, oh, look, guys, this got out of hand. I didn't mean for this to end in death. It was an accident. I've done something wrong. Take back this money. I don't want it anymore. So this is very much something that we as sinners do all the time, where we get riled up in anger and we do something incredibly stupid and hateful, but then we don't want to admit that that's actually that we knew what we were doing the whole time. We want to say, oh, I didn't realize things were going to get so out of hand in this. And we have this kind of halfway confession of guilt. And in response to that halfway confession of guilt, Judas gets no forgiveness at all. The chief priests say, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just so in Judas going back, and I appreciate the way you painted the picture for Judas, because it does make him a much more relatable character within the gospel there, that this is not something that we would be immune to, right? We shouldn't be standing here looking down upon Judas as if I would never do that, but rather see in him that exactly those things that exactly we would in fact do. And so in coming back, he sees things have just totally gotten out of hand. And I think to go back just to the timeline, this particular scene here of Judas' conversation with chief priests and elders, it makes perfect sense in my mind to put it very close to the events of Matthew that he's describing. Maybe the events of Judas' suicide and following come later, but right here, I think this makes good sense to see on Good Friday, or very close to it. And to see, so it's like he's going back here, but as you said, not in a repentance that's going to look to Christ for forgiveness, but in a repentance that's maybe seeking to shift the blame, kind of what you were saying earlier about the spreading out of judgment, that here we have an example of Judas trying to throw this judgment, this sin back upon the chief priests. He says, look, I've sinned by shedding this innocent blood, and he wants some sort of justification from them rather than seeking the justification that comes from Christ.
Right. Yeah. In a way, he's trying to kind of transfer the blame onto them, as though he's saying, I didn't know you guys were going to take this that far. It's sort of like a trope you see in movies all the time, where a kid gets involved with a group of thieves or gangsters, or, whatever it might be. And he's not as corrupt as they are. But he wants to kind of shift the blame over to the guy who's sort of the head of the gang, as the one who, you're the one who ended up, taking things too far. You're the one who made a bigger mess out of this than I expected it to be. I just wanted it to be a simple robbery, but then you started murdering people, kind of, things of that nature. And that's a bit of what Judas is doing here. It's this kind of, okay, guys, look, I wouldn't have done this if I would have known how far you were going to take this, which is, of course, a preposterous thing for Judas to think, because dealing with Jesus is an easy thing. This is to me one of the things that's always been strange to me is when people will say, well, I think Jesus was a great moral teacher, but I don't think he was the Son of God. Well, it's one or the other. Or rather, it's not one or the other. I mean, so either Jesus was the Son of God and is the Son of God, and everything he said about himself was true, and he's far more than a great moral teacher, or he was a liar, and he's therefore not worthy of your consideration. So throughout the whole trajectory of history, I doubt there are very many people you could point to who said, oh, that guy claimed to be God, but he was also a really great guy. So with everyone in history who's made that claim, you can't say that. So when it comes to Christ, well, what on earth are they going to do, Judas? What do you think is going to happen when you say, hey, this guy that keeps saying that he's the Son of God, which is definitely 100% blasphemy if it's not true, here he is. Do what you think is appropriate with him. Well, they're not going to slap him on the wrist, and they're not going to rough him up and tell him to go on his way. They're going to put him to death, because they know that Jesus isn't going to stop saying this, and because ultimately they're all actually afraid that it's true. And that's ultimately, kind of it shows the sort of the weakness of Judas's confession, is he knows he's done something wrong, but he wants to shift that blame and wants to pretend like he didn't know, the way that things were going to go here. It's just a little bit like hiring, like saying to a hitman, go ahead and take care of them, and then coming back afterwards and saying, well, I didn't know that you take care of them to you meant that you were going to kill them. Of course you knew what it meant. Of course you knew the way that things were going to go.
Mm-hmm. So Judas has this confession of sorts. He at least recognizes he has sinned with this innocent blood. But he goes back to the chief priests and the elders to confess it. What of their answer?
Yeah, so their answer is just the greatest failure of a priest to exercise his office. So the priests were there to forgive the sins of the people. The priests were there to pronounce absolution to those who confessed their sins. It was formed in a different way than the office of the ministry is today. But in the same way that if you go into your pastor and you say, look, here's the sin that I've committed, and I feel tremendous guilt over it and tremendous regret. His job is to give you the blood of Jesus and to tell you that your sins are forgiven. His job is to pour out the mercy of Christ upon you, not to say, well, that's a bad situation. Good luck figuring that out, right? There would be no answer that would prove a man more unworthy of the office than for him to respond that way. And yet this is precisely what it is that we see from the chief priests here. And it's a very interesting and very telling response, because it shows that they don't actually believe in the justice of their own cause. Because if they did, and Judas came to them and said, look, I've betrayed against innocent blood, you're going to put Jesus to death, this is really bad. If you actually were 100% convinced that you were in the right, you would say, no, look, don't beat yourself up about this. I know that he was your friend. I know you were close with him. But this man is a liar and a blasphemer, and he's going to destroy everything, and the judgment of God is going to pour out upon us, and the Romans are going to destroy our entire nation if we don't do this. So this had to happen. It was necessary. You did a good thing by doing this. You should be proud of yourself for doing this. They don't respond that way at all. They once again just try and push everything away and make this someone else's problem. They just say, hey, go deal with that yourself. Deal with your own guilt yourself. And then that kind of same thing is shown just a little bit there in the next couple of verses, where they say it's not lawful to these coins that Judas throws back at them. It's not lawful to put them in the treasury, since it's blood money. Blood money is money that's tainted with sin. So blood money, the way we would use the phrase today is, if you had if I'm a pastor of a we'll go with a sort of another movie analogy. If I'm a Catholic priest in one of these mobster movies where all these mob guys are showing up for every Sunday mass, and it, and you keep taking their offerings, that's blood money. Blood money is, this money has been won by evil means, or it's been stolen by evil means, and yet you accept it. So the fact that they say, no, we have to obey the law of Moses. We can't possibly accept this illegitimate money and put it into the treasury. Well, where did Judas get the money in the first place? He got it from them. So it's this fascinating acknowledgement that they know that what they're doing is sinful, but they just simply won't. Their hearts are hardened, and they will not process that information.
Before we go into that part of the scene further, just finish in terms of what happens to Judas. He hears this devastating answer, and his response is despair and suicide.
Yeah. So see to it yourself is what they say to him, and that's exactly what Judas does. Is he goes and he administers to himself the punishment for murderers. He hangs upon a tree. Right? He hangs himself. He's not crucified, but he hangs upon a tree, which is the punishment given for those of this capital crime. So it is such a profoundly sad moment. I've often said that there are a number of details in the Gospels that make it abundantly clear these are all true stories. These things all happened. And a number of those things are things that you would not have happen if you were making up a story, because they just don't kind of fit the mold of the stories that humans tell themselves. So I've often kind of halfway joked, but this is entirely true, that one of the things that shows that the Gospels are reliable historical narratives is that every woman in the Gospels is named Mary. And that's incredibly confusing. And the only reason you would have 7 or 8 or 9, however many Marys there are, is because that's actually what their names were. And another thing is, if you want a story of redemption, if you want a story highlighting the profound mercy and forgiveness of God, that story is Judas leaving the chief priests and going to the foot of the cross and repenting to his Lord there and finding forgiveness. And it's Judas becoming the chief apostle after the death and resurrection of Christ. I mean, if you're going to tell a story about the mercy of God, in that sense, Judas is a better figure to highlight the mercy of God even than Peter is. But that's not the way the story goes, because that's not what happened. That's just simply not the historical event of things, and God chose his own reasons for things happening the way that they did, and choosing, who of the disciples was going to be the Judas of the group, which is sort of a weird thing to say, but you get the idea there. So you have this great moment where, if you were telling a made-up story where you were just kind of wanting to highlight certain themes, this would end with Judas finding redemption at the foot of the cross. But it doesn't. It just simply shows sometimes people don't believe. And when people don't believe, when you tell someone who has no confidence and no hope and forgiveness, and who's riddled with guilt, see to it yourself, that's precisely what he does. He sees to it himself, and he administers to himself the punishment according to the scriptures that he knows he deserves.
It is a terribly tragic moment there with Judas, and making it all the more tragic is these chief priests, the elders, whose responsibility was to forgive the people, and rather than pointing Judas to this true sacrifice that's about to take place at their own hands, they have no answer for him at all. And as you've said, their guilt, they know that they're doing this wrong. They admit it by their actions within the text. So they take this blood money that Judas has thrown back to them, and they buy a field with it. It's going to be a burial place for strangers. What's going on here?
Yeah, so the field of blood, which is the burial place for strangers. So if I remember correctly on this, I don't have the details right in front of me, but this was kind of another ordinance according to the law of Moses, and so that you would have a place to bury those who were, to sort of show dignity to those who had died amongst you, but were not known and were not members of your people. So they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. And that's when you come into this bit of an odd section in Matthew's gospel, which is oftentimes a little bit confusing, where he quotes the prophet Jeremiah, but then he has a quote that is in part from Jeremiah, but largely from the prophet Zechariah, which has led some people to make the charge of the errancy of the scriptures, that, this is a mistake that Matthew made. I think, though, however, I'm pretty persuaded by the argument that what's actually happening here is this is a style of quoting the scriptures that you actually do see quite frequently, a number of times in the New Testament, where you have a bunch of scriptural passages kind of lumped together, which likely comes from back in the days when obviously manuscripts were very difficult to come by, and nobody owned a full private collection of the scriptures that were readily available to them. Is that people would memorize passages of scripture, and they would memorize them along kind of topical lines. So you're memorizing chunks of passages from here and from there, from various different books that are all kind of linked by a common theme. And so there's a bit in Zechariah where Zechariah is, what is it, chapter? I forget the exact chapter, but where the prophet is talking about this. If it seems good to you, give me my wages, but if not, keep them. And they weighed out my wages as 30 pieces of silver. Then the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, the lordly price at which I was priced by them. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord to the potter. So it comes from a section of Zechariah's book talking about God's judgment against Judah and Israel. And then you also have quoting from, you have bringing in bits of Jeremiah as well. So from Jeremiah chapter 19, then you shall break the flask in the sight of the men who go with you and say to them, thus says the Lord of hosts, so I will break this people and this city as one breaks a potter's vessel, so that it can never be mended. So in all of this, what's probably happening here is that Matthew is referencing kind of a chunk of the scriptures that people would have had memorized, and is attributing it to Jeremiah because that's the major prophet of the group. So it's probably more so that he's not so much saying, that the prophet Jeremiah specifically wrote these words, but that these were the words on this topic which we would know as being from by the name of Jeremiah, and then sort of these other associated prophets. It seems to be what it is that Matthew is doing there.
Right. We should allow the writers of the scriptures to follow their rules when it comes to the way that they would quote the Old Testament, rather than our rules living in a totally different time period. And so, yeah, what Matthew's doing here, although it may seem strange to us, is perfectly legitimate and Holy Spirit inspired true word of God for us. Pastor Fiene, we've got just under 3 minutes left here on the morning as we summarize and wrap things up. We've talked a lot about the warning and of judgment for Judas, for the chief priest as well. But maybe as a way to wrap up, what's the comfort in this text for us as Christians?
Yeah, the comfort in this text for us as Christians is kind of going back to what I was saying earlier. The reason Judas doesn't find forgiveness isn't because it wasn't there. It was because he didn't see it, and he wouldn't open his eyes to see it, and he was blinded by his own grief. But so the comfort in this text is, if Judas had actually gone to the foot of the cross, what would his Lord have said to him? And we have the answer. I mean, we have it, in the fact that Peter denies Jesus 3 times during his passion. And then in John chapter 21, Jesus restores Peter 3 times with this "feed my lambs, feed my sheep, feed my sheep." I may have quoted those out of order, but you get the idea there. So where for each time that Peter denied Jesus, Jesus restores him and proclaims forgiveness to him and brings him back into the apostolic office that Peter himself threw away by denying Jesus. I mean, that's if a disciple is ultimately a follower of Jesus, then there's no better definition of not following someone than trying to push in the opposite direction of them. And ultimately, this is what it is that Christ most certainly would have said to Judas, that your sin is put away, that the blood that you extracted from my veins is the blood that I have used to forgive you and to welcome you back into my kingdom. And ultimately, that's what it is that Judas, or Jesus, would have said to Judas, is what Jesus says to all of us. We are the ones responsible for the death of Jesus. We're the ones who pounded the nails into his hands and his feet on account of our sins. All of our attempts to make ourselves righteous and holy before God resulted in nothing but the Son of God dead upon the cross. And yet it's from that cross that Jesus breathes out those words, "It is finished." And with those words, Jesus is proclaiming to us that the it of those words, "It is finished," is the process of dying for our sins. It's this atoning act that makes us holy and gives us the right to live with him forever. That's ultimately what it is that Jesus says to us on the cross.
Pastor Hans Fiene is the pastor at River of Life Lutheran Church in Channahon, Illinois, helping us this morning with Matthew chapter 27, verses 1 through 10. We are sinners. The guilt is ours, but we don't have to see to it ourselves. Jesus has seen to it for us. By his death, by his resurrection, that is our joy, to stand forgiven in him. In Christ, it is finished. I'm your host here on Sharper Iron, Pastor Timothy Appel of Grace Lutheran Church in Smithville, Texas. Thanks for spending the morning with us. Talk to you again tomorrow.